Holy Spirit, kept alive by the sacraments of baptism and the Eucharist. Structure, the bishops. Each church has one bishop, usually. There might have been more some places or whatever. The city of Rome, for instance, the Romans take a great joy, pride, whatever, in having a pope, a bishop of Rome. But in the early days, every church had a bishop. So if there were 50 churches in Rome, there were 50 bishops. There would have been one that was the senior bishop, and that would have been the pope. But I might as well tell you about the pope. Anybody want to ask me about the Orthodox understanding of the pope?
Yes, please.
Okay. Glad you asked. The Orthodox understanding of bishops is that each church should have a bishop. In order to be a bishop, you have to have the same faith as the surrounding bishops. Okay, so you've got an area, let's just put an area up here geographically. You've got the big city. Let's say the big city is Jerusalem. And then over here you've got Bethlehem. And up here you've got Nazareth. And over here you've got another one, another one, another one, another one, another one. Okay, let's say the bishop of Bethlehem dies. Now that church is called a widowed church. And you need a new bishop. So what would happen in the early centuries of the church is that the people of Bethlehem would gather together and elect a candidate to be their bishop. They would actually have an election. Now, he's still not the bishop yet, because all of the other bishops, the bishop of Jerusalem and the bishop of all these different towns, would come to Bethlehem and they would question the candidate to see if he had the same faith that they have. If they were convinced that that candidate had the same faith that they had, they would then lay hands on him, ordain him to be a bishop. Rather quickly it became the fact that laying hands on is just literally like this. But it came to be rather quickly that instead of laying hands on the new bishop, they put the Bible on his head and then they put their hands on the Bible. But that's just a side issue. That's called apostolic succession. That each bishop has the same faith as the other bishops. Well, as time goes by, there are some geographical and cultural differences, and we start to have some separation within the Christian community. The first big break, there's small breaks all along. Even the apostles in the New Testament talk about heretics. But the first big break takes place, and someone will talk to you about this later, the ecumenical councils. At the Third Ecumenical Council in Ephesus, the city of Ephesus, we have the first major departure from the Christian church with a group of people we call the Nestorians. They believe that, that Jesus is God and man, but they believe this, that Jesus is God and man. Okay, so there's an imbalance that his manhood, it takes preference over his divinity. And they break away. And then at the Fourth Ecumenical Council, which was just 20 years later, there is another group of people called the, they hate this name, let's call them the Copts, we won't call them Monophysites. The Coptic Church in Egypt and some other places, Armenia and India and Ethiopia. They break away because they have an emphasis on the divinity, that Jesus is man and God, you know, just the opposite of the Nestorians. So those were the first breaks. Then time marches on. We still have a unity between Rome and the rest of the Eastern Church, but it starts to break apart, and Rome starts to go its own direction. By the time we get to the year 800, there is a man by the name of Charlemagne. You've heard of Charlemagne? Want to know an interesting fact? It was on the internet a month ago. 800, the year 800. There are enough descendants of Charlemagne now to numerically show that everybody who's of European ancestry, if you're of Asian ancestry or African ancestry or Native American, you're not counted in this. But if you are Italian or Spanish or German or Russian, anybody that's European ancestry, we're all the 32nd, 33rd, and 34th grandchildren of Charlemagne. We're all cousins. Isn't that nice? So anyway, Charlemagne comes along, and he is proclaimed to be the special guy of the Pope. And he writes a letter to the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, and he says, "Here I am, I'm your brother, your equal." He writes it in Latin, and the patriarch doesn't read Latin because they had stopped communicating in the same language by this time. They have their own language, Greek and Latin. They have their own cultural things going on. They're not paying that much attention to each other. The Greeks are going gangbusters with culture and, you know, education and whatever. We're now in the Dark Ages, or medieval period of the West, when things aren't going so well, things are falling apart. Charlemagne stinks. He doesn't take a bath very often. The Greeks take baths every day. They wear perfume. The emperor is really kind of, we would call him a dandy, I suppose, perfume and all that stuff. And Charlemagne writes with this letter saying, "I'm your equal." And he gets a letter back saying, "Shut up, you are not my equal, you are a barbarian, you can't even write a letter in Greek." So Charlemagne then says that the Greeks are heretics because they dropped the filioque clause from the creed. Somebody will tell you about that, but it's how the Holy Spirit fits into Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And Charlemagne writes a letter. The Pope has to tell Charlemagne that he's wrong. And the Pope in Rome puts the creed, the original creed, up on silver tablets in the old St. Peter's, not the new one. And that goes along for a while until about the year 1014, when Rome puts into their creed officially this word in Latin, filioque, that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Now there's a difference in theology between the two churches. Other things are happening. The popes are German. They want to have everybody Germanized. The Greeks don't want to have any part of that. There's a lot of tension between the two. And in the year 1054, there is a split. The Pope, Leo, sends a delegation to Constantinople, and they excommunicate Patriarch Michael. Patriarch Michael excommunicates the Pope, except the Pope is already dead, so I don't know how you do that. Since 1054, there has been no communion between East and West. And the West has gone one direction, the East has gone along the line that it was going before, and there is no communion. So the Pope is seen, if there was unity between, the Pope would be the first bishop of the Orthodox Church, but that doesn't mean he would have universal jurisdiction. In the Roman Catholic system, the Pope appointed the new Archbishop of St. Paul. That would never happen in Orthodoxy. The Archbishop of St. Paul would be appointed by bishops of America, not by some Italian guy, or Argentinian, whatever it is. So the Orthodox Church looks at Rome as a vacant see. We know that the Pope is there, etc., and we make nice with him, and he likes us, and we have lunches and dinners with him and things like that, but there is no communion between the two. Does that answer that question?
And that's primarily because of the filioque?
And the fact that the Pope also thinks of himself with the Germans, the idea that the Pope was the universal primate, the universal primate sounds like a gorilla.
That he's the overseer of all the churches?
That would be the Roman Catholic understanding.
When did that teaching start?
It started off slowly. You start getting it at the time of Charlemagne. You get a little bit of that. You start even maybe a little bit earlier, but you get a pope like Gregory the First. We celebrate a liturgy during Lent on weekdays, the liturgy of Saint Gregory, called the Liturgy of Pre-Sanctified Gifts. Gregory is opposed to universal jurisdiction. He has some letters where he says that that's not right. But then by the time we get to Leo, we start to have the Pope starting to exercise more authority, because he is the final arbitrator of disputes between churches. So if Constantinople had a fight with Antioch and they couldn't agree on anything, then according to Orthodox teaching, that would be decided by Rome, but he could not force his decision. They would have to come to him and ask for his advice on that as a brother, the elder brother. So that would be the Orthodox understanding of the Pope. That's going to be the hard one to finally put to rest. The filioque and other things, there's the differences between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism certainly are the papal claims. The papal stuff. The filioque is right up there too. But then there's some other things. Who's Mary exactly? Is there an Immaculate Conception or not? The Orthodox say no. Rome says yes. Original sin. Augustine comes up with this a definition of original sin. The Orthodox don't have that. We use the term, but we mean a completely different thing. And there's some other things, grace and there's just some other things that
Can you just expand a little bit on that Mary and original sin? I've never heard that.
Yeah, according to the Roman Catholic teaching, Mary is not an inheritor of the original sin of Adam. According to Augustine's teaching, we all inherit sin from our parents, going back to Adam and Eve. Mary was exempted from that according to the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, because she is going to be the mother of Jesus and therefore she has to be sinless. The Orthodox Church says no, that she's just like the rest of us. She chooses not to sin. There's a whole bunch of people that choose not to sin. St. Anthony is one of them. And there's others that, babies, don't sin. Origen said that way back in the 2nd century, 3rd century. And most babies don't sin. Even Augustine had trouble with his own doctrine. He writes a letter to Jerome, and he says in his letter, I don't know about this thing with babies, if they're unbaptized. He says, that's a hard teaching. He says, it's the only logical thing, so I have to stick with it, but I don't like it. And so for centuries, if a baby died that wasn't baptized, a lot of cemeteries, and the Orthodox are guilty of this too, would have special sections for the unbaptized. Our teaching on a non-baptized person dying is not that they will not go to heaven. It is that they're in God's hands. And if they were good, God will take care of them. If they weren't good, then they'll take care of themselves. So we probably have